students. Welcome back to our anatomy and physiology class. Today we are going to discuss an important aspect of our human physiology, and that is bone growth and development. So how do bones grow in length? Now, bones basically grow uh, in specific regions. And earlier we looked at the structure of the long bone. We saw the long bone has got the epiphysis, it has got the metaphysis, it has got the diaphysis. So basically, bone growth takes place within the epiphyseal plate, which is found just between the epiphysis and the metaphysis. Now, there are specific regions within the epiphyseal plate where bone growth takes place. We call those specific areas zones. So we have one what we call the reserve zone. Then we have got the proliferation zone. We have got the maturation and hypertrophy zone. And lastly, we have got what we call the calcified matrix zone. So we look at each of those individual zones one at a time. Now, if you look keenly, this one here is a drawing of a long bone. At the tip, the far end here, if you can see my cursor, at that far end, we have got the epiphysis. Then we have the middle part of the bone, the diaphysis. Now, between the diaphysis and the epiphysis, we have got a region here, what we call the metaphysis. It is within the metaphysis that we have got the epiphyseal plate, which is responsible for bone growth. And therefore, if you are to cut off a small portion of the bone in the epiphyseal plate and enlarge it, you end up with this structure, this drawing here, which now shows the various regions or the various zones of the epiphyseal plate where growth of bones occur. So these zones, you can see this one here is the reserve zone. Okay, we'll be discussing much more about it. We have got the proliferative zone just beneath the reserve zone. Then going down, as we may come from the top of the bone, moving downward towards or into the diaphysis. So from the reserve zone down, we have got the proliferative zone. Then below the proliferative zone, we have got the zone of maturation and hypertrophy. Then just below the zone of maturation and hypertrophy, we have got what we call the calcified matrix. Then now when you move from the calcified matrix downward, you'll be getting into the pure metaphysis, and then below the metaphysis, of course, you'll be getting into the diaphysis. I hope that's clear with you. So allow me to discuss with you now each of those zones and see what happens, particularly to bone cells in each of those zones. The first one is the reserve zone. Now, the reserve zone is the uppermost part of the growth region. Okay, remember the growth region, what you're calling the epiphyseal plate, is just found towards the tip of the metaphysis. So on the upper side of the metaphysis, just neighboring the epiphysis, we have got what we call the reserve zone. This zone contains very small, minute chondrocytes, which are embedded within a fluid medium, what we're calling a matrix. These chondrocytes at this point do not participate in bone growth, but they basically secure the epiphyseal plate to the epiphysis. Now coming down, we have got the proliferative zone, which is a very, very thin layer as we move down towards the diaphysis. It contains a group of slightly larger chondrocytes in relation to the size of the chondrocytes in the reserve zone. In this proliferation zone, new chondrocytes are made or they are formed via mitosis. You must be familiar with the process of mitosis and meiosis. So new chondrocytes will form via mitosis, and this basically to replace those bone cells which die on the side of the official end of the plate. Okay. Now next we have the zone of maturation and hypertrophy. Here we have got older and larger chondrocytes compared to the proliferative zone. Okay, in this region, basically chondrocytes undergo maturation. Okay, the maturation of chondrocytes and enlargement results to longitudinal growth of bones. Okay. The other zone is the zone of calcified matrix, which is now the zone of the epiphyseal plate, which is now much more closer to the diaphysis. At this level, most chondrocytes actually die because as we move down, as the cells mature, there's the calcification of the matrix within which they are embedded. As the matrix gets calcified, the cells not get enough nutrients and enough oxygen. Therefore, the cells actually die. So in this region, we mostly find dead chondrocytes. Okay. We also have got a penetration of blood capillaries into the growth region, and as the blood capillaries penetrate, they allow osteoblasts to come in. The osteoblast is actually responsible for secretion of bone tissue. Okay, they are responsible for secretion of bone tissue on the remaining calcified matrix. Okay, basically the zone of calcified matrix links the epiphyseal plate to the diaphysis. Generally, your bones will continue to grow until early adulthood. From the just actually before birth, after birth, bone growth continues through early childhood, through adolescence, and into early adulthood. However, the rate of growth differs at different stages in life. At some point, the rate of growth will be very, very fast. At some stage, actually, as we grow older, the rate of growth tends to slow down. But that rate of growth is basically controlled by hormones. Okay. During bone formation, generally, cartilage is replaced by bone tissue. Now, the moment the entire cartilage is replaced by bone, then longitudinal growth will stop. So in a long bone, at the end of the day, when growth is over, what remains as a sign of growth is a thin line, you can see the red line here, a thin line between the epiphysis and the diaphysis. That thin line is normally called the epiphyseal line. So that epiphyseal line is actually what remains as evidence of growth having taken place once all the cartilage in your bones has been replaced by bone tissue. Okay. So that's all about how bones grow in length. But then how do bones grow in diameter? Because as your bones become longer, as you grow older, they also need to thicken up to be able to absorb more force, more weight from your body as your body puts on more mass and weight. Okay. Now, growth in diameter of bones called a positional growth. So a positional growth here is basically growth in diameter of bones. During growth in diameter or during a positional growth, normally osteoclasts resorb old bone, which lines the medullary cavity. Later we discuss about the medullary cavity, the inner part of your bone. That inner surface of the bone is lined by bone tissue, and as the bones grow, that old bone tissue is resorbed. It kind of broken down and absorbed, taken to solution. The chemicals in these bones are released. That's what we're calling resorption, the breakdown kind of the solution of bone. So that resorption is actually done by osteoclasts. So the resorb bone that lines the medullary cavity. Osteoclasts are responsible for resorption of bone that lines the medullary cavity. At the same time, we have got the cells called osteoblasts. Through a process called intramembranous ossification, will produce new bone cells and bone tissue just beneath the periosteum, which is the outer layer of your bone. So that erosion of old bone along the medullary cavity, which is accompanied at the same time by formation of new bone beneath the periosteum, will at the end of the day lead to an increase in the diameter, the size of your bone. Okay. The process by which old bone is resorbed and then new bone is made to replace the resorbed bone is what we call modeling. So the modeling process is actually responsible for growth in diameter of your bones. Now, another concept related to bone modeling is a process we call remodeling. Okay, called remodeling. Now, remodeling primarily takes place during bone growth, and as you grow all through your adult life, bones undergo remodeling, which is a process in which old bone is damaged, and at the same time, new bone is deposited to replace the damaged bone tissue on the same surface. Remember, remodeling occurs on the same surface. We have got resorption of old bone on a bone surface, and at the same time, a new bone being formed and deposited at the surface where old bone is being resorbed. That process is what we're calling resorption. What we call remodeling. So remodeling is actually responsible for most bone healing processes following an injury. Okay, usually during an injury, you have got damaged bone tissue. The damaged bones have to be resorbed, and as they are resorbed, at the same time, new bone must be created and deposited to replace damaged bone. When you do a lot of exercise and activities, again, somehow your body speeds up the process of remodeling, where old bone is resorbed and new bone is made or formed to replace the resorbed bones. At the end of the day, it means that when you do more exercise, you've got new higher rate of new bone formation. Therefore, your bone tissue tends to be much stronger through exercise, through physical activities. Let's look at fractures and bone repair in more detail. The first thing you should be asking yourselves, what is a fracture? What's a fracture? Basically, a fracture refers to a broken bone. Okay, talk about a fracture, we mean a broken bone. Naturally, fractures heal by themselves. What medics do is to facilitate the healing process by one, ensuring that there's no infection during the healing process, and they also ensure that if the the bones have moved out of position due to fracturing, then they are put back in position. So that as they heal, and at the end of the day resume their original position. Otherwise, bones will tend to heal on their own following a fracture. Now, if bones are not reset correctly, of course, they will heal, but you'll remain with a deformation. Therefore, it's good or important that your bones are put in place and supported to recover and leave the bone structure of your limbs as in their original position as much as possible. Okay. Now, when doctors manipulate bones so as to set them into their natural position without surgery, we call that process closed reduction. That is, maybe if my arm is broken, okay, I've got a broken arm, okay, then I've got the ulna and the radius broken. The doctors may have to pull the bones apart, okay, and then return them into position so gently so that the broken bones are able to come or hook into each other appropriately, okay, without having to cut through my skin. That process, what you're calling closed reduction. But in a case where they have to do some surgery, open up the skin, okay, so that they can be able to put the bones back into position or reset those bones, we call that process open reduction. Okay. Now, just some bit of information about the types of fractures. There are several types of fractures which are classified based on one, the complexity of the fracture, number one, number two, the location where that fracture occurs, and other features relating to the fracture. So based on those three factors, we have got what we call transverse bones. Transverse fractures, which are fractures that occur straight across the bone axis. The fractures occurring across what we call transverse. You remember a transverse, if you cut a transverse section of a stem. So you've got a kind of a transverse cut or breakage through your bone. We call that one a transverse fracture. But if the fracture occurs somehow diagonally, we call that one an oblique fracture. Okay. Now, if we have got a kind of an oblique fracture, but then the bones twist, okay, they twist at the fracture point, we call that one a spiral fracture. So like the bones, the bones twist so much such that they fracture in the process of twist. That you will find that the lower bone, okay, and the upper bone have moved, like the lower bone moves towards the right, the upper bone moves towards the left. We end up with a kind of a fracture. The breakage point we call a spiral fracture. Now, if we have several breaks or breakages of a bone resulting to so many small bones at the point where the two segments meet, we call it a comminuted fracture. Like you've got a fractured bone here, but then there are multiple fractures at that point, so that if you are to do a surgery, you'll pick out several small individual broken bones. We call that one a comminuted fracture. Okay. Another type of fracture is what we call an impacted fracture. You can imagine if there was kind of pressure from the bottom on at my elbow, and then there's pressure from above, okay, at my on my palm, like a case where maybe you fall down from up a building, and as you come down, you come with your hand down, and then you punch your hand on the ground, you'll end up breaking your ulna and the radius. Okay, but apart from just them breaking, you find that the upper part will crash into the lower part. Okay, so you've got a fracture, but that fracture is a combo fracture because the bones have crashed into each other. We call that one a compacted and an impacted fracture. Now we have got a less serious fracture called a green stick. A green stick is where there's a partial fracture where just part of the bone is fractured. The bone is not completely broken, just fractured on one side. We call that one a green stick. Okay. Now we have got another serious fracture where a long bone fractures or breaks. And then when it breaks, you find that the bones move out of position, like if my ulna or radius or both of them are broken, then you find that the lower part twists or turns in that direction, okay? In that direction towards the right. And then actually as it does towards the right, it crashes into the flesh. And you can see a protrusive swelling on one side. And then the upper bone turns on the opposite direction. You can also see a swelling on the other side. So the two pieces of the broken bone actually crash into the flesh. We call that type of fracture an open or a compound fracture. That's a very, very serious fracture. But if we just have got a breakage of a bone, but the flesh around, the skin around remains intact, the bones don't crash into the skin, we call that one a closed or a simple fracture. So those are the various types of fractures based on their complexity, their location, and a few other factors. The images below demonstrate what I've just explained. This one is a closed fracture where the bone completely breaks, but the bones don't crash into the flesh or the skin. This is an open fracture. The bones twist and crash into the skin. This is a transverse fracture where there's just breakage in a transverse or across the bone. This is a spiral fracture due to twisting of the bone. The other types we have got a comminuted fracture where you have got multiple fractures at one point leading to a lot of several fragments of bones at that point. Then you've got an impacted fracture, which is a result of compression of the bones crashing into each other. Then we have got a green stick, which is just a fracture on one side. The bone does not completely fracture. And lastly, an oblique fracture, a fracture occurring in a diagonal manner. Okay, so those are the different types of fractures. Now, we'll also look at how bones repair themselves. Remember, I've said that bones naturally repair themselves without any intervention, okay? But the work done by the medics is best to ensure that there's no infection, and then they reset the bones so that as they heal, they're able to resume the normal, natural position as much as possible. Now, there are stages or steps involved in bone repair. The first step is what you call formation of a fracture, hematoma, which is a kind of a clot, mainly consisting of blood cells and tissues around the injured point. So basically, when your bone cracks, blood tends to flow from the vessels, near the fracture point. These vessels could be within the periosteum, it could be vessels from the osteons, or vessels from within the medullary cavity. They allow blood to flow towards the fractured region. As blood flows to the fractured region, the blood cells begin to clot. That clot forms what we call a fracture hematoma, and that will happen within 6 to 8 hours following following a fracture. Now, formation of a fracture hematoma will basically interfere with the flow of blood to the bone, and once you cut off flow of blood, then cells around the broken bone will die. Okay, those cells undergo death because of lack of oxygen, because of lack of nutrients. Following formation of a fracture hematoma is formation of a callus, or if they many call them calli. Okay, so as we say that formation of a fracture hematoma cuts off supply of blood, leading to death of cells. As that happens, chondrocytes from the endosteum will secrete fibrocartilaginous matrix between the two ends of the broken bone. That matrix then creates a kind of an internal callus, okay, an amorphous material consisting of mainly chondrocytes, or consist of mainly some cartilaginous matrix. The chondrocytes from the periosteum at the same time, and also the osteoblasts, will create an external callus. So you've got an external callus toward the side of the periosteum of the bone, and you have got an internal callus toward the sides of the medullary cavity. Mainly the external callus is made up of hyaline cartilage. The internal callus is made up of hyaline cartilage, okay? Whereas the external callus is made up of bone, okay? Now the formation of the internal callus and external callus at the end of the day will stabilize the fracture. The bones, if the bones were moving against each other, they tend to stabilize. That movement tends to decrease as the internal and external calli form. The third step in the bone healing process will be the replacement of cartilage by trabecular bone. As time moves, osteoclasts will resorb the dead bone. Remember, after fracturing, you have got bones which are broken off from the initial bone. They don't get enough supply of nutrients, supply of oxygen. So basically, those bones will die, or the bone cells will die. Those dead bone tissues are resorbed by osteoclasts. Once that happens, the osteogenic cells become active. They begin to undergo cell division by mitosis and then differentiate into osteoblasts. Okay, the cartilage in the calli is then replaced by trabecular bone via the process called endochondral ossification, which we discussed earlier in our previous lesson. The very last stage in the bone healing process is final healing and remodeling. I remember we talked about the formation of the internal callus on the side of the medullary cavity and the external callus towards the periosteum. So as cartilage gets replaced by bone, the internal and external calli eventually unite, and we have got now compact bone replacing the spongy bone that was initially formed from the cartilage. Okay, so compact bone will form on the outer margins of the fracture, and that completes the healing process. When healing is complete, you might have a slight swelling as you can see in this bone where the fracture was, particularly on the outer surface of the bone. But over time, and in most cases, the bone undergoes remodeling on the outer surface, and over time the swelling may disappear. Okay, there might be no evidence at the end of the day that there was a fracture in that bone at all due to the remodeling process. The last concept I want us to talk about bone formation is calcium homeostasis, that's the balance of calcium ions within the body. Remember, calcium is essential for bone formation. We talk about calcification, symptom of deposition of calcium within the matrix. Now, calcium is one of the most abundant mineral in the body. However, your body cannot manufacture calcium by itself. Calcium has to be taken in through diet. But as much as your body does not manufacture calcium, your body requires calcium for bone formation. That's during calcification or mineralization. You need calcium for formation of strong and healthy teeth. You need calcium for regulation of heartbeat or heart rates, and you need calcium for muscle activity or contraction. Okay, if you have looked at blood clotting process, what you call hemostasis, you also remember blood coagulation, and the blood clotting requires calcium. Okay, we need calcium for regulation of nerve impulse or for nervous impulse transmission. So calcium is a very, very important mineral, and that's why it's very, very abundant in the body. Generally, your body will have about 10 milligrams of calcium per deciliter of blood. Okay, if your body cannot maintain a steady calcium ion concentration, then you are likely to suffer from two conditions based on the level of concentration. One of them is hypocalcemia, which means extremely low levels of calcium in blood, and the other one is hypercalcemia, which is an exaggerated amount of calcium ions in the blood. Either case can be risky to your health. So hypocalcemia is where there's low levels of calcium in the body. Causes of hypocalcemia or hypoglycemia, the results of hypoglycemia or the effects of hypocalcemia may include poor blood clotting, irregular heartbeats, heart failures, poor muscle contraction, nerve malfunctions, and brittle bones which can easily break. What are the causes of hypocalcemia? These causes may range from hormonal imbalance to improper diet. Remember, we get calcium mainly from diet. So if you don't take enough calcium in your diet, of course, you'll likely suffer from hypocalcemia. There are various treatment options based on the cause. If it's hormonal imbalance, you can have hormonal treatment. If it's an issue of deficiency of calcium due to diet, again, you can have diet treatment or mineral supplements to stabilize your calcium level. The other condition relating to calcium concentration is hypercalcemia, which is abnormally high levels of calcium. Such high levels may cause the nervous system to be underactive, and underactivity of the nervous system may result in symptoms such as tiredness, fatigue, weariness, and so on. You may also have sluggish or very slow reflexes. Reflexes are basically automatic responses to stimuli. So you'll have slow reflexes if you've got hypercalcemia. You might also suffer constipation, loss of appetite, some bit of confusion, and in severe cases you might develop or suffer from a coma. Now, how is calcium regulated? There are two basic hormones which play a key role in calcium ion regulation. These hormones are called the parathyroid hormone or PTH and calcitonin. But besides these two hormones, we also need vitamin D for regulation of calcium ion concentration in the body. Now let's see what happens when there's a drop of calcium ion concentration in the body, or a condition of hypocalcemia. In such a case, your thyroid gland cells will release more parathyroid hormone, PTH, which will have the following effects in your body. One, parathyroid hormone will stimulate osteoclast cells to proliferate, and also stimulate resorption of bone by osteoclasts. Now, resorption, remember, refers to a breakdown of bones or digestion of bones, releasing the mineral composition in those bones. So during resorption, what happens that calcium is normally released into the bloodstream. That definitely will increase the amount of calcium in circulation. Number two, parathyroid hormone will promote reabsorption of calcium from urine in the kidney tube, so that you not lose calcium from your body. You return as much calcium in your bloodstream as possible. Lastly, parathyroid hormone will stimulate synthesis of vitamin D. Now, the role of vitamin D is to facilitate, to increase the absorption of calcium ions from your gut. Remember, when you eat food that has got calcium, the calcium ions need to be absorbed into your bloodstream from your gut. That process is facilitated by vitamin D. That's why parathyroid hormone will stimulate synthesis of vitamin D, which in return will increase absorption of calcium from your gut. Now, that happens when there's hypocalcemia. What about when there's hypercalcemia, when there's too much calcium ions in the bloodstream? Now, in that case, the thyroid gland will be stimulated to release a hormone called calcitonin. Calcitonin has got three effects in the body. One, it will inhibit the activity of osteoclasts. If you inhibit osteoclast activity, then you slow down or stop resorption process. Therefore, there will be no more calcium being released into the bloodstream. Number two, calcitonin will stimulate calcium uptake by bones. So if there's a lot of calcium in circulating the bloodstream, much of that calcium will be deposited and stored in the bones, that it's not in free circulation. Lastly, calcitonin will decrease the absorption of calcium from the kidney tubules. All these events combined will lower or reduce the amount of calcium ions in circulation. Okay. Up to that point, I want us to come to the close of our lesson, and I will be posting some questions relating to this discussion after you have watched through the discussion. Number one, you can raise some questions for clarification through our chat option. And then number two, you'll attempt the questions and forward them to me for checking. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video lecture. Bye.